His Thursday must-win for Michigan State to get into the tournament. We have one of the best bracketologists out there, Joe Cook-Shugart, on to join us. And then, hey, what did Jonathan Smith say to a recent ESPN podcast that caught our attention? Let's go.
You are Locked On Spartans, your daily podcast on the Michigan State Spartans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of Locked On Spartans is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. Spartan friends, Spartan family, Locked On Spartans listeners, thank you all so much for kicking off your day with us here at Locked On Spartans. It's not me just rambling on and on in this first segment. No. We have one of the best bracketologists out there. And I'm not just saying that because he's nice enough to join the show. Go to bracketmatrix.com. Look at this guy's rankings over at 131 Sports. It's Joe Cook-Shugart. Joe, welcome to the mayhem of championship week. How on earth are we doing over there, man?
Frazzled. There's the stressful time of year for me, and there's a lot of chaotic results so far, but I'm hanging in there, and I'm happy to join the show, man.
We're hanging in there too as Michigan State fans, as they have lost 4 of their last 5. We get to open up the Big Ten tournament on Thursday against Minnesota, which, hey, that's weird. Where's this Big Ten tournament being played at? Oh, yeah, that's right, Minnesota. So it'll be a home crowd for the Gophers. Before we get to the importance of Thursday's game, let's talk about where Michigan State is on the seed line for you, because before the Indiana game, they were a 9 seed. Where are they right now, Joe? It's getting scary. I know that much.
I not a ton of games played yesterday, but a loss, not an atrocious loss. Obviously, it's a middling opponent on the road. They kept the game close, but I anticipate. I haven't done my update for today yet, but I do anticipate them falling down to the 10 line.
With that said, obviously, hey, Thursday a win probably most likely means you're in. But would a loss be devastating enough, in your expert opinion, to move Michigan State outside of the bubble? How do you read this whole situation?
So I wouldn't call it a must win, but a win would deodorize the sweating on Selection Sunday. So I think you're right, Matt. I think a win more or less locks up a bid, especially because it gives them a free shot at Purdue in the quarters. Yeah. While a loss probably makes the first 4 game the best case scenario, honestly.
Okay. Oh God, sorry, that took me a second to digest. And this is something I've been rooting for, ever since the Northwestern game. I was like, hey, what if they just lose the next 2, get to the first 4? I think a path to a deep tournament run is better there than it would be an 8-9 game. But now the coward in me is coming out, and I'm actually scared if this team is even going to make the tournament to begin with. So I'm frazzled over here, Joe. This is not a healthy place to be. I need to see a win Thursday. We need to see a win Thursday.
Yeah, I mean, you're 100%, Matt. If you look at historical trends and patterns related to seeding and getting to the second weekend, 10 seeds, 7 seeds, 11 seeds, 6 seeds do a lot better than 8-9. 8-9, it's a death trap. It happens every so often. I mean, you saw it last year with Arkansas beating Kansas, but it's very difficult to beat a 1 seed in the round of 32. So they're better. I mean, if you want your cake, you want to have your cake and eat it too. Cheer for them to end up on the 10 line, because then you're not sweating as much as that first 4, but you still got a path to make it to the second weekend.
I actually did look that up. The last 10 tournaments. In 8 of those tournaments, there's been at least one seed that did not make it to the second weekend. I'm already starting to cope over here. But so just to throw that number out there, hey, odds are at least one seed doesn't make it out of the first weekend in 8 of the last 10 tournaments, if that's going to make Michigan State fans sleep better at night. If they do win on Thursday and end up getting one of those 8 or 9 seeds. Joe, I need you to either tell me I'm spot on with this or if I'm just spiraling a little too out of control, because there's something that happened very, very recently in the history of the NCAA tournament and selections that has me shook about Michigan State. And I go back to Rutgers last season. where it seemed like a foregone conclusion that they were going to make the tournament no matter what. Yes, they lost 7 of their last 10 games. They stumbled to the finish line. But you go to bracketmatrix.com, where all the bracketologies of the internet are posted on there, and all but 11 of them, of the 229 bracketologies, had Rutgers in. That was a shock last year that they missed the tournament. It was a late skid to end the year. Is this, do you see this with Michigan State too, since they are also stumbling to the finish line? Or is that a different enough situation where we don't have to make a direct comparison to what happened to Rutgers last year?
So twofold here. I would say that there's some legitimacy in that comparison, but I don't think it's as scary as someone like yourself that's in potential panic mode might make it. And the reason that I say that is because of the surrounding metrics, non-conference strength of schedule, like the teams that you played, having the quality, that win against Baylor is really carrying some water right now. It's huge because Baylor's, going to be a 2 or a 3 seed in all likelihood. And so having, running them out of the gym is kind of saving their day a little bit. And so while the struggle down the stretch is certainly a reasonable comparison, and them being a Big Ten team, so being kind of front and center and having it be last year, I think that Michigan State's ever so slightly ahead of where Rutgers was there. That being said, obviously, just beat Minnesota. It's easy. Just beat Minnesota, man.
Oh, yeah. Just beat a team that you're going to be favored by 6 against. That's been so easy for Michigan State lately. Oh, God. I got to say, though, like you saying that it is a little different than the Rutgers situation last year, that you added at least 2 hours of sleep on my night tonight. So for that, just on the surface, I thank you very much. I'm also appreciating just the differences in our posture right now. You're just sitting back, cool, calm, and collected over there. You're frazzled, you say? Man, I got to be more like you, man. You're handling this all in stride, whereas I'm physically shaking over here, Joe. This is not a healthy time of year.
I'll use a quote from The Replacements. Good. Gene Hackman in that movie said, "Ducks on a pond." That's what I'm like. I'm like ducks on a pond, where might be calm on the surface, but the water, feet are moving a mile a minute. So.
I like that. Got to show a good poker face. There is one big storyline going into this week nationally for college basketball. I'm sorry. There's a lot of storylines, but this is one that really pertains to Michigan State. Indiana State lost in their conference tournament. There's a lot to do, a lot to be said of whether they deserve the at-large, whether they're going to make the NIT. Here's the interesting thing, though. Michigan State, should they lose, will be a bubble team, just like we've discussed. Is head-to-head an important factor in selections for the committee here? Because obviously Michigan State beat Indiana State earlier this year. Is that something that will give them the nod over Sycamore's team, or do they not even look at head-to-head matchups here?
So I'm basing this on the exposure that I've had thus far this year and in a couple of years past, and in particular something that stands out to me during the preview show. That North Carolina was slated as the 5 overall seed. Tennessee was the 6. They had, for all intents and purposes, nearly identical resumes. North Carolina had the head-to-head victory over Tennessee.
Okay.
That is, in a vacuum, with nearly identical resumes. Michigan State and Indiana State have drastically different resumes. You have one team playing in the MVC that's going to have, Drake gets the auto bid. Indiana State's going to be that borderline bubble team, and then no one else is sniffing the tournament. Whereas the Big it's a whole entire different beast. You look at the resumes. Indiana State has a lot more wins, but they've played, a lot more inferior opponents. So it's kind of a little bit apples to oranges. I don't think, based on my experience, that committees lean into head-to-head when you have such disparate tournament resumes. It's
okay.
Have really comparable resumes. If you happen to play each other, then it might impact where we seed you on the seed list. I will also say that it's more, per my point about the North Carolina-Tennessee comparison, it's more about where are you going to be seated than will you make the field. I think they leverage head-to-head more if a couple teams played each other and they're borderline 2 or 3 seeds. Maybe one gets the 2 and the other gets the 3 if the one that won gets the 2. But when you're saying, do you get a bid or not get a bid, it matters as much.
Okay, that's good to know. I got a few more questions for you, but Joe, I hate to do this, especially to a lovely guest like you. I got to send you to the bench because I need to talk to people's ears off about Nissan. That's right, our friends over at Nissan USA want to talk about upgrading your adventures. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Well, our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventures to the next level. Like, for example, the 2024 Nissan Rogue. Perfect both for city drives and your great escapes. Class exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant that is on call for almost everything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system to make every mile of your journey synced up. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect mid-size crossover for your next adventure. Or take the 2024 Nissan Armada. It will change what you expect from a full-size SUV. Picture both a rugged 4x4 that can seat up to 8 in first-class luxury and style. 2, tow bigger and explore together in the 2024 Armada. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Now let's drag one of the best bracketologists out there, Joe Cook-Shugart of 131 Sports. I have a question. This might be like a selfish question because I'm going to grade a take that I had, a few months ago at this point. After Michigan State lost to James Madison, we had a good friend, Connor Muldowney, on the show. And I said, hey, you know what? This could be one of the losses that really cost Michigan State a seed line. Now, Joe, back then, we were talking like, hey, it might be the difference between a 3 seed or a 2 seed. And we've seen how this season's gone so far. But if they won that James Madison game, is Michigan State already locked in right now? Like, was that bad of a loss where that could be the difference between already in and already out? Or what does that one game do to Michigan State right now?
So I'm going to say that it's not that one particular game, especially because similarly to when you lost that game and you thought, oh, maybe that's the difference between 2 and a 3. I don't think anyone realized how good James Madison is.
Totally. Yeah.
They're a team. App State just lost last night or the night before. They're in all likelihood, they're going to obviously be favored. They have the championship game either today or tomorrow. It's coming up whenever it's played in the Sun Belt. And so that isn't a bad loss. And frankly, if you're talking about losses that are hurting them now, losing at home to Iowa or Ohio State, recency and the fact that, like I said, James Madison's very likely a tournament team. They're going to be in discussion even if they don't win their tournament. It's not weighing quite as heavy as those home losses to Iowa and OSU. So I don't think it's as impactful as someone might think. I think that the struggle down the stretch is tipping the scale a lot more than an OT loss to a 30-win team.
Okay. And
I think that you could literally flip any loss on the schedule to a win, and then it would be a lock at this point. They've played exactly to the bubble. That 19 wins, it's like, oh man. And it's not that it's so much the 19 wins optically as it is having 13 losses and then, barring a Big Ten tournament championship and, going into Selection Sunday with 14 losses is a lot. But they, if you look back, I don't remember what year it was, but when they, I think they played Miami in the 8-9 game and they had 14 losses or 15. They had a lot of losses that year, but they had a high quality schedule. Vanderbilt, same scenario in that year. I forget what year it was, 2019, something like that. But there's a precedent for that. But yeah, it's really flip any loss to a win, and they're probably not even caring about the Minnesota game.
Take your pick of the 13 games that they lost, folks. So this is one of the difficult parts about constantly talking about a losing team, because the fan base is split. Sometimes, we get called out for not being hard enough on the team. Yeah, that's what we just did the last 14 minutes, talk about how they're on the bubble. The other half, they say, hey, try to be positive for once over there, you big old Eeyore. So here's this for the positive crowd out there. Joe, let's say Michigan State just bangs out a 4-pack of wins here and they win the Big Ten tournament. What's the ceiling for their seed line? Let's all go to fantasy land together with this one, Joe.
So I, like if they win if they can bang out 4 wins and win the Big Ten tournament, it would require a win over Purdue, and let's play it out that favorites win. So they're going to play Northwestern or Wisconsin in the semis, and then play Illinois or Nebraska in the championship. That would be 3 more wins against tournament caliber opponents. I could see them reaching a 7 seed, which would be ideal because then they avoid that second round 1 seed opponent, and they're playing like a hypothetically worse team in the first round. Or at least a lower seeded team in the first round. And the easy comparison for me, because I don't know if you know where I'm going to go with this, but the 2017 runway slide off the runway practice jersey Michigan team.
Yep.
8 seed in the Big Ten tournament. They won an 10 seed going into the Big Ten tournament. They won the Big Ten tournament and they got a 7 seed. And made the Sweet 16. So, there's that precedent there is if Michigan State does that. And if you told someone at the beginning, if you told State fans at the beginning of the year, this is what they were going to do, it's a massive failure. If you tell them that now, you guys are making the Sweet 16, I think it feels like a relative success considering how the team is closed.
That's a really good conversation topic for later. Like what would make the season a success? Because over here, I'm just one fan, but I say it's still Final Four. My expectations of what is an achievable standard for success still remains Final Four. But again, that's a different discussion for a different day. I want to leave you here on this, and thanks a lot for your time, man. Really do appreciate you. I know it's early in the week. I know that there's a lot of bubble teams, but is there anyone that Michigan State fans should be scoreboard watching? Obviously, just beat Minnesota. That's the easiest way in. But let's also look at this through the lens of reality. It's not that easy anymore. Should Michigan State fans be rooting for any other teams to lose, or is it still way too muddy out there?
No, I think the picture, now that we're into championship week, I think the picture's starting to clear itself up a little bit. So the general rule of thumb is root for, I'll start with actually who you're rooting for. And that's small or mid-conference teams that are going to get an at-large bid anyway. So Gonzaga, St. Mary's, Dayton, Florida Atlantic. Florida Atlantic's maybe borderline where if they, they don't, but I think they're essentially a lock, especially if the committee has any sort of bias towards, hey, this team returned most people and they were a Final Four team last year.
Yeah.
But just to be safe, root for Florida Atlantic, Dayton, St. Mary's, and Gonzaga to just take care of business in West Coast, American and the Atlantic 10.
Yep.
So then you root against any random large conference bid thieves, like some team that's the 10 seed. Georgia comes to mind when they got a seed because they won the SEC tournament one year. So root against any nonsense like that happening. And then also root against fellow bubble teams. That's the easy one. And in terms of bubble teams that I have a list in front of me here in terms of who I'd say root against for the bubble teams: Mississippi State, Virginia, Colorado, fellow Big Ten team Iowa, who got into the picture thanks in large part to a road win in East Lansing, and then the Big East Four. So that's kind of difficult because they're going to probably beat each other up, and someone's going to come out of that. But St. John's, Villanova, Seton Hall, and Providence are all barely in or barely out. So.
Easy as that. Just be a big hater this week, Spartan Nation. We could do that. That's not an issue for us over here. So, Joe, really do appreciate all your time. Again, folks, 131 Sports, some of the best bracketology out there. Joe, go try to enjoy the rest of your week. I'm sure you'll get minutes of sleep every night. So, really appreciate you, man.
Yeah, I hope you enjoy the additional 2 hours of sleep I gave you with the peace of mind. I appreciate it.
Great. You got it, Joe. Until next time. FanDuel is the place to be this March Madness. That's right, America's #1 sportsbook. They are letting you say goodbye to all of your busted brackets out there because FanDuel lets you bet on every single game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or the 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, for new customers, it gets even sweeter. New customers, you get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That is $200 in bonus bets to use on point spreads, money lines, props. Hey, you can even pick on who's going to win it all. And if you're over there chugging that green and white Kool-Aid, you think that MSU is due for a few wins coming up here in March, should they make the tournament. 17-1 to make the Final Four, 75-1 to win the whole thing. That is bet $1 to win $75 over at FanDuel. So what are you waiting for out there? Go join the fun over at FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. All right, we're going to switch it up here. We're going to talk football, and we're going to talk about another podcast here. And I'm not going to go give you the whole transcript of the College Game Day podcast with Reese Davis, Pete Thamel, because, well, that would be kind of just a ripoff of what they did. But I think it is important in the recent interview with Jonathan Smith to point a few things out. Again, the College Game Day podcast. So they talked about a lot, right? I mean, Jonathan Smith was on there for 30, maybe 40 minutes, talked about MSU, what drew him to the job, relationships with Izzo, Matt Ishbia, the Dodgers, Chad Johnson, a nice little story there. But I wanted to pull out 4 things that he said. Now, one of these was a great question by Pete Thamel halfway through. I really, would have slid this question up in the conversation if I could produce this thing, because it was fascinating. And it was kind of prodding for a real raw answer from Jonathan Smith. He said, could you get the sense that these players were craving structure? Because it's pretty well documented what happened last year, whether it was with Mel Tucker or Harlan Barnett. Severe lack of coaching structure throughout the entire season. So he point blank asked him, are these players relieved to have an adult in the building finally? Jonathan Smith, now I'm paraphrasing here, he did say that when he watched tape, both game tape and practice tape throughout the weeks of the season, he didn't see any give with Michigan State's players. They were competing throughout the entire months of the season, no matter how tumultuous they got. Now, what he said that I thought was really interesting too is that he saw a team that he thought could have won 6 or 7 games last year. And that's something that we've hypothesized. That's something that a lot of you out there have said as well. That, hey, you know what? The roster in last year's team was just a pinch of coaching, a pinch of structure, could have probably got to 6 or 7 wins. And that's not just me. That's not just you thinking that. That's the actual man in charge, Jonathan Smith, saying that too. I thought that was a pretty revealing answer. And Jonathan Smith is pretty buttoned up. He's a good combination of authentic. You would think that this guy was born and raised in the Midwest. He comes off as that Midwest vibe. But that was a pretty revealing answer. So I did appreciate that one. And also, on top of that answer, he said, quote, the fact we were able to keep these guys gives me optimism. He talked a lot about how big it was to retain some of the guys that went into the transfer portal. He even pulled out Derek Harmon for a few minutes and talked about him, how important that was to get him back on campus, how important it was to build relationships with him, get to know what he really wants out of his college career, and the fact that he's a local kid, and that resonated with both Harmon and Smith a lot. So really revealing stuff there. Now, one big thing missing from Michigan State football the last few years, and we've railed on this many a time, is that what on earth was the identity of Michigan State the last 3-4 seasons? I don't know. I don't think the coaching staff knew, and I don't think the players knew. So he was asked about what identity will look like at Michigan State. He said, quote, I want to make the game physical on both sides of the line of scrimmage, and then immediately said that starts with the run game. Because, well, of course, a good run game can get you some yards, but it also sets up play action, something that could be very important for Aiden Childs here, who we will get to in a minute. And he also pointed out the weather, too, of why the ground and pound run game is going to be important in November weather, because, well, that's when the game gets really physical and you could just start wearing down teams and break down their will to win. Now, last year, Oregon State was in the middle of the pack in pass-run ratio. They were 67th in the nation, whereas last year, Michigan State, 29th. They favored the pass at 53%. So could that have been because they were down in a lot of games and they had to air the ball out? Perhaps. But going over to Oregon State, it was a really good split. It was just above 47% of the time they're calling passes. But yes, that's not just lip service from Jonathan Smith. He's really going to get the run game going here. Now, last year, the Beavers in the Pac-12, they were tied for second in yards per carry at 4.9 yards per carry. And if you remember how abysmal it was here in East Lansing, Michigan State was dead last in the Big Ten at just 2.9 yards per carry. So it's a run game that's going to need a jolt here. And they certainly have gotten some with Tanner Miller, interior offensive lineman coming from Oregon State. You also got Geno Vandermark back out of the portal, and you have a stable of running backs that hopefully, this is really going to be mixing it up, if they can stay healthy this year, that would probably really benefit Michigan State. I know we're going out on a limb there. But yeah, I did like Jonathan Smith talking about the identity because it sounds kitschy. It sounds like a little too cliche, but it really does mean something in the world of college sports, specifically football. And we've seen the unfortunate consequences if you don't have an identity the last few years. Now, of course, they did spend some time on Aiden Childs. You guys already know who he is, the sophomore quarterback incoming from Oregon State. And they asked, hey, what makes him special? And he pretty much named everything. He said it starts with the instincts, the timing of routes, moving it in the pocket, when to run and when to hang into the pocket, pointed to his big arm. But he was really focusing and putting a lot of emphasis on just how smart of a player Aiden Childs is, especially for how young of a player he is. Last year, he entered college as a 17-year-old player. He also reminded Pete and Reese that he's going to start this year 18 years old. He doesn't turn 19 until the end of September. So as talented as Aiden Childs is and can be, he's still a young pup. He's still got a lot of learning to do, but one thing that impresses Jonathan Smith is that he has already learned a lot and came into college with a lot of these great instincts that you often can't coach to underclassmen. So just another log to throw on that fire of Aiden Childs' hype. It's impossible to slow down that train right now. But yeah, Jonathan Smith just added more fuel to that fire. One other thing I thought was interesting, and they talked about, hey, what drew you to Michigan State? What have you liked about it? He pointed out the college campus. He likes the areas, the restaurants and what have you around it. But one reason he came to Michigan State, which is something that I've never heard another coach say, quite bluntly, is that one of the many things he looked for is the work-life balance. How far it would take to get from the office back to his house. Or if not his house, how long it would take to get to the office to other events around the city. Say something's going on at one of his kids' schools or a sporting event nearby, which I thought was very interesting because rarely do you just hear that be a reason for college coaches. Usually it's all about recruiting or the facilities, which, of course, Jonathan Smith does appreciate here in East Lansing, but he gave a lot of reasons why he likes Michigan State. And when he said that was unique. And of course, that's not to say that, hey, he wants a work-life balance, so he's going to be slacking. I mean, no one here is going to accuse Jonathan Smith of, having a little too much life in his work-life balance. He also revealed on this podcast that he's essentially been working away from his family for the better part of 2 or 3 months. So it has been a grind. And of course, we've seen how hard he has been working with the coaching hires, his work in the transfer portal. So yeah, but just thought that was interesting. Is that just the short commute from Spartan Stadium or the new football facility back to his home, wherever he's, choosing to live, was a reason he wanted to get to Michigan State. Again, you got to go listen to the whole podcast, the College Game Day podcast with Reese Davis, Pete Thamel. I really thought that they did a fantastic job with interviewing Jonathan Smith. A good balance of legitimate hard-hitting questions that, us fans want to know. And then also just trivial questions for, getting to know the guy behind the coach, Jonathan Smith. So really, really good work there. I'm going to try to remember to throw the link to that interview in this YouTube and podcast description. So go ahead and spend 30 or 40 minutes of your time on that interview. And Jonathan Smith, if you're listening, and if you want to spend anywhere from 10 to 30 more minutes on another podcast, hey, we'll love to have you. All right, gang, we will be back tomorrow. We're going to be talking a lot more Michigan State basketball, the Big Ten tournament with our guy Greg Waddell of Sleepers Media. But until then, enjoy the rest of your day. Love you all. Go Green.